like having information at your fingertips when you want it? Have you ever wanted to share your story or expertise with the world? Melanie Taddeo has the solution to both these with one amazing opportunity. As a teacher of radio broadcasting and podcasting for the past 7 years, and as the co-host of Take Another Look podcast, Melanie has discovered many tips and tricks in creating an engaging podcast that will provide your audience with information at their fingertips when they want it, and you want an opportunity to share your story and expertise all in one. Tonight, Melanie will share with you the beginning steps to help you create a podcast and complete your Level 4 elective for Toastmasters. Please help me welcome DTM Melanie Taddeo.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. I appreciate it. Welcome to Raising Champions Advanced Toastmasters and Maple Leaf Toastmasters and any other guests. I truly appreciate you coming. I'll start off by introducing my right-hand or left-hand man, Sean Pickard. Sean Pickard is a station manager of Voices for Ability radio station that works hand in hand with Connect for Life. And Sean and I teach together, and we have a lot of fun. And I thought I'll bring him along. He can be the eyes of the operation, keep me in line, and hopefully be entertaining for both of us. So my intention for tonight, as Sean said, is to give you the beginning stages of how to create a podcast. Now, it is exciting and daunting at the same time. So there's a lot of opportunities for us to learn. Now, I will not be going into the editing or the uploading. I will, however, provide that in a separate video, so you will get all the information, but it's a big extra step that we just don't have time for tonight. So, but let's jump right in, and I will ask, what is podcasting? And if you could raise your hand so Sean can call on you and be my eyes, I'd appreciate it.
Oh, no volunteers so far, Melanie, so I think I get to start picking on people. Oh, Karen. Karen's being brave. Karen.
A podcast is like an online discussion, or you could be giving your opinion on something, you could be interviewing someone else, but it's like a little mini show with 1, 2, maybe more people chatting to the camera.
Okay. Interesting. Thank you. Anybody else want to add to what they feel a podcast is?
My hand's up.
Find out. Oh, Wayne.
For me, a podcast could mean an audio recording or a video recording.
Okay. Good information, guys. Anybody else want to add to it?
I think we should hear from Demetra.
All right.
Well, I don't know, and that's why I'm here to learn tonight.
Well, Sean, I'm just going to say there's a couple of graduates from my program in the audience, and none of them have put their hands up. I'm a little bit offended, but that's okay.
They don't want to be wrong.
They don't want to be wrong, is right. Paige, what's a podcast?
Were you talking to the mic, knowing what, like what type of niche that you know about to tell people?
Okay, all right. So a podcast actually is an episodic series, yes, episodic series of digital audio on any topic that you may have expertise or knowledge on that people can download from the internet to their personal devices and listen to at their leisure. So
or as I like to call it, just another episode.
Just another episode, exactly. So when you think of a podcast actually is the umbrella of many different episodes. So you could have a podcast, and I'm just going to use mine as an example. Take Another Look podcast is our umbrella podcast. That's what it's out there as. But we have 20 different episodes on different topics. So a podcast is all usually audio. You can have some podcasts that are video, but you're then getting into vlogs instead. But a lot of podcasters have started to add the element of video, especially when they upload it to YouTube, because it's a little bit more engaging for people watching. People love videos. They love to see people's facial expressions. But podcasts are usually audio focused. And it could have one or multiple hosts, and it can be on any topic. Sean, let's just think about some of the mainstream podcasts out there. There's so many, there's millions. Any come to your mind? And don't just talk about yours, okay?
No, I won't talk about mine, but I mean, let's be honest, Melanie. By the time we're done this conversation, there will probably be about 130 podcasts just starting in the time it takes for us to do this tonight.
That's very true. And that's the great thing. Podcasting started, the roots of it started way back in the 80s, but actual podcasting started in 2004. And it has evolved over the last decades. It's easier access. Most digital smartphones all have an app for podcasting, whether it's Apple Podcasts, could be, I don't know, help me out with the Samsung one. I don't use Samsung. Sean, what is the one, the app that comes on there for podcasting?
Oh, that is a good question. I don't use the Samsung app. I'm into, I don't even remember the name of it now. Podbean.
Okay, fair enough. So again, you can download apps from the App Store. It could be Spotify, it could be Anchor. There's so many different ones, and they are so accessible now. You can listen to them on your smart devices, on your iPod, your iPhone, your iPad, all the digital things you can have. As long as you have the app, just click, and all of a sudden you can listen to it. Does anyone know when most people listen to podcasts?
Spotify.
Oh, that's one of the platforms, absolutely. But when do people most listen to podcasts? What are they doing when they listen to podcasts?
Driving, walking, doing their housework.
Okay, yeah, driving, walking, doing their housework.
Walking for sure.
Walking, yes. You? Exercising is another big one when they're working out. Anything to keep your mind occupied in a short period of time. But before you create your own podcast, you should ask yourself 4 simple questions. And let's do this together. Sean, I'm going to get you to pose the question.
Let me just get to the right page here. Question 1. Why are you doing this podcast?
Okay, so majority of us here to complete a project on pathways, or maybe to share your message with the world. Whatever your reason, but you need to know what your reason behind it is. The intention will help you with creating the content. The next question, Sean?
Who is your audience?
Obviously, you want to know who your audience is. Is it going to be Toastmasters, or is it going to be teenagers? Is it going to be seniors? Because this will help you in the language that you use in your podcast, the guests you may have, and the content you cover. The next question, Sean?
Why should they listen?
Of course, if you don't know why they should listen, they won't know why. So really be specific. Why should they listen to you? If they listen to my podcast, they will get A, B, and C. So you want to make sure you're very specific in knowing what your intention is and what the audience will get out of it. Once you've answered, there's one more. Go ahead, Sean.
Number 4, how long will the episodes be?
Important question. Now, obviously, it will depend on your audience. Now, the sweet spot for podcasting, we call it, is anywhere from 20 minutes to 45 minutes. But it will depend on the topic, on your content. If it's just you talking, or if you have a guest, co-host, it really depends on the podcast itself. Now, there has been shorter podcasts out there for sure. Some quick as 10 minutes. But really, how much information can you get out in 10 minutes that is of value? Maybe a PSA, a quick announcement, hey, coming soon, but truly 15 minutes would be my suggestion for a minimum. Now, for the podcast project, create a podcast on elective level 4, you have to create 60 minutes of content. It doesn't specify how long of episodes, but you have to do 60 minutes of recording. And you get to break it up any way you want. You could do 2 episodes, half an hour each. You could do 4 episodes, 15 minutes each. You get the idea. making that decision is up to you. And that's part of the creative process, but really make sure you have enough content to cover that time. So Sean, those are the first 4 questions we need to ask ourselves before we start. So guys, we will send these questions to you in the resources we're sending. And really, before you even dive into the project, read them, answer the questions, because if not, probably don't want to start yet, because if you can't answer those, the content you create may not be as engaging as you want it to be. Now, for Raising Champions, oh, Sean, come on, you got to give me a signal that I know you're just going to give you a pause for that. For Raising Champions, we're creating this podcast for our club. So we may have a little bit more specific guidelines as we go, but we're creating this platform so that everybody has the opportunity to be creative, and the content that we share will help all of us grow and learn together. But if you're doing a podcast for yourself, and many people on this call have their own podcasts already, you get the flexibility and the creativity to kind of go with the flow. And tonight we're going to talk about the steps to creating a podcast. So let's get with it, Sean. We've asked those questions. First of all, I think we need to start with the different types and styles of podcasting, because there's so many. And how do we know which one to choose, Sean?
Oh, that is a great question, because what are you trying to get across? There's so many different aspects of it. So let's get into the very first thing. Let's talk about the interview podcast, Melanie.
It's pretty self-explanatory, isn't it? So obviously you can have an interview that purely just interviews, and you can have a series of guests interviewing them, and that's it. But that's the style of your episodes. Maybe that's the style of your entire podcast, and you're not going to stray from the interviews. That's all you're going to do. You have to make sure that you have enough people to interview and you have enough things to cover. The tricky part about a podcast is finding a common thread that isn't going to limit you. So remember, the podcast is the umbrella of what you're creating. The episodes are the specific topics. So again, I'm just going to use Take Another Look podcast. Our umbrella is having uncomfortable conversations. And every episode is a different topic that's a little bit awkward to talk about, people shy away from. But overall, everything we're talking about is uncomfortable conversations. So if I decide that I'm going to do a podcast on the elections coming up, because that's timely, and I'm going to interview all the candidates running for our upcoming election in Ontario, that's all I'm going to do. I'm limiting myself. That's all I can cover. Those are the only people I can interview. So would I want to be that specific in my topic of the podcast, the umbrella? Or could I just say, I'm going to have an interview type style podcast, but I interview many different people on their thoughts and ideas. Which do you think I should have?
Second one.
Second one, okay.
The latter.
Okay. And again, if you are doing this for business purposes and you know what your focus is, then obviously you can do that. You can be more specific because your business isn't going to change. But for Toastmasters, if you're going to interview style, you want to have a broad area to talk about. You could talk about people who completed their DTM. You could talk about people that have done level 5 on pathways, what they can expect. You can do interviews with new members, what brought them to Toastmasters. So there's a lot of things, so you don't want to be too specific, but interviewing style, again, as long as you have the people to interview, you're comfortable with interviewing people, then that's a good style. Sean, what's the next style?
The next style is the solo show podcast.
If you love talking, if you are able to talk for 45 minutes by yourself, maybe the solo show's for you. You don't have to deal with those people you're interviewing with, and you don't have to deal with co-hosts. They get a little bossy sometimes, you know. So solo
Or
might be
annoying with sound effects.
Sorry?
Or annoying with sound effects.
Or annoying with never annoying. But again, solo is another option. And we're just going to go through all the options and then talk about the pros and cons of everything. Go ahead, Sean, the next style.
The panel podcast.
Now, the panel podcast is just that. You have a panel of people talking about a topic. Each episode could be a different topic, but you're always going to have the same panelists. Now, this is something, if anybody's ever listened to the podcast, Ouch, from BBC, It's a panel discussion of individuals with disabilities talking about disability-related topics. Now, this is an amazing podcast through BBC, but they have the same people on the panel all the time. So you get to know them. It's almost like a family. You start to drop in every week, hear their episode, get to know them better. And that's how you build it. Now, this ding, 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 I don't know if anybody else caught on, but moderating a panel discussion, another project in Pathways. But the panel discussion, again, would keep the importance of keeping the same people all the time, being able to schedule them to meet when you record all the time, pros and cons all, but you wouldn't have to do all the talking yourself. Next style, Sean.
The conversational or co-host.
So everybody loves to have a conversation, right? And having a co-host takes off some of the weight on you as a host. You don't have to do all the talking. You can have a conversation like Sean and I banter back and forth all day, every day. Gerda and I in our podcast, we just have deep conversations about uncomfortable conversations. This is good as long as you have the right chemistry with your co-host. You get some combinations where you will have that one that just likes to be the center of attention all the time, and the other person says nothing. There's no balance, and it's a little bit awkward. So you want to find somebody you really mesh well with to be your co-host. Somebody you have something in common with, maybe same values, morals, same intention for a podcast, and somebody you have fun with. I could definitely host something with Sean because we have a lot of fun bantering back and forth and being silly. Garrett and I get along really well because we have the same mindsets, the same sets of values. So finding that co-host is a good possible one to do. And it can be a member of your club, but maybe it's just for one episode, or maybe it's for the entire podcast. Something to consider. Next style, Sean.
The nonfiction storytelling podcast.
Sean, why don't you talk a little bit about this one?
Yeah, these are, let's just say some of the fun ones, or at least some of the more popular ones. We used to watch, for example, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure most of you would agree, we used to watch the serial shows on TV where you're waiting, you have to wait for the next week to catch what happens. They now have serialized episodic podcasts. Yes, that is actually the term they use, ladies and gentlemen, serialized episodic podcasts. It's like watching Friends, only instead of watching it, you're listening to it on your commute into work.
But Sean, this is nonfiction. So it's like the true crime series. It's like the ones that actually happened. Some historical ones are this style as well, right? But
You're right. I grabbed the wrong show as my example.
Okay. So it's important for you guys to, if you really like nonfiction topics, this may be something that Wayne would consider doing something on Titanic. Again, nonfiction storytelling, you have to be able to be very well knowledgeable on the topic, educate, or able to research, and also engage your audience for long periods of time through storytelling. And we all are great storytellers, that I know. The next one, Sean.
Number 6 is the fiction storytelling podcast.
And that's what Sean was talking about again, fictional. So again, a great opportunity to share your stories that aren't necessarily true. We have heard a lot of these in different genres. So again, it could be a children's podcast. It could be a romantic podcast. There's so many, the stories are endless. So this is something, again, you have to be very creative, and you also have to be able to engage your audience with different vocal variety through storytelling to engage your audience and keep their attention. The next style, Sean?
Our next one is another one of those big word podcasts, Melanie, the Repurposed Content podcast.
So if you go to any radio station, you'll see there's podcasts because they have certain shows on at certain times. And I don't know about you, but I work during the day. So I'm not able to tune in at a certain time of day to catch that interview or catch that show. So they now have the information on a podcast version so you can listen to it after. So they're repurposing what has already happened. And most radio stations do this now. And a lot of other people are doing it when they're doing workshops like this. If I was to turn this into a podcast, I could just repurpose this information, take the audio file and put it onto my podcast if that's what I wanted to do. So something that's pre-recorded, that people weren't able to catch in the moment, but they can listen to later.
And our last one, the hybrid podcast. Sounds ominous.
It does, but it's my favorite one. It's a combination of every type. So again, remember, podcast is your umbrella. So if I create a hybrid, that means I can do solo, I can do co-host, I can do storytelling, and I can do interviewing, or I could do anything, combination, panel. There's no limit. Every episode could be a different type of podcast episode. The Racing Champions one will be a hybrid podcast because, again, every member's project will be their own. So if Karen decides she wants to do a solo and she wants to talk about how to structure a speech, we can still put it in the hybrid model because that's her. But maybe later on, Kathy and Marissa are going to do one about how to handle a difficult audience. Maybe later, Wayne and Jordan are going to do an interview one, and they're going to interview each other about why they joined Toastmasters, the benefits of an advanced club, whatever it may be. You get my idea. So everybody's podcast episode can be different. And that's why the beauty of hybrid is so easygoing. Even Garrett and I, even though we're co-hosts, we have a hybrid model because we do interviews, we do conversational, we also do panels. So really, truly, hybrid gives you the most opportunity. But it doesn't always work for everybody because some people know exactly what they want to do to accomplish. And this is usually when you're doing something independently that you want to do and you want to have full control over. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with the style. You just have to decide what style is going to work for you. But for Raising Champions, I've selected the style of the podcast, but you would just have to select the style of your episodes. Any questions on the different styles? I know it's a lot of information. Don't worry, we're going to send this to you guys after.
The episodic, particularly the fiction ones, are taking us back to the old radio shows.
That's exactly it. You're right. You know, you're sitting there waiting to hear what happened in the Shadow or the Lone Ranger, you know, the good old radio days. Absolutely waiting for those. Almost like a soap opera, but on audio. Definitely, that's the style.
We also have a question from the Raj.
Yes, Raj.
Yeah, just wanted to understand what would be the difference between the conversational and the interview type of podcast.
So the conversational is with a co-host. You always have a co-host on your podcast. It's you and another person having a conversation, but you also could do an interview in that style. Okay. So again, please know that you can always do interviews in any style, but some podcasts are strictly interviews.
Okay.
But the conversation has two people as hosts.
Right. Okay.
Any other questions on this?
I have two questions.
Go ahead, Wayne.
One question is, as far as podcasts are concerned, would you ever do a live podcast or would that be classified as streaming?
That's streaming. Podcasts are pre-recorded.
Okay. Second question is in reference to the level 4 project.
Yes.
Would the Toastmaster have to host the podcast or can they produce the podcast?
Aha, very good question. So for what it is, it actually in the project, it says that you should post it. However, with Raising Champions, you'll just have to send it to us and we as a PR team, right, Raj, will post them.
So did you say post it or host it?
Oh, sorry. Did you say host or post? I thought you said post.
No, host.
Host. You would host your episode. Yeah, you have to host it.
Okay.
Yeah, because it's you doing the podcast. You can be a guest on somebody else's podcast, but that's not you doing the podcast.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I thought you meant post. My apologies. So now the next question is, how do you name your podcast? There's different ways. Sean?
And let me get back to it here. Yes, we have a couple of different ways. We can look at things like the clever name. It's catchy, but if it doesn't describe what it's about, what do you do, Melanie?
Well, here's the thing, guys. If you have a catchy name, I don't know, let's just say, what's the name of that one we were just talking about, Adam Curry's?
The source code.
The source code. Pretty cool, eh? I have no idea what it's about. catchy, but I have no idea what it's about.
Isn't
So
that IT?
Pardon?
Wouldn't that be about IT, the source code of an application?
It might be, but I wouldn't know because I don't listen. I'm not an IT person, right? So catchy names are great, but you want to have a tagline that explains it. Okay. So catchy is good for popularity and quick when you're searching for a podcast that's going to stand out to you because it's catchy, but you need to have a tagline that then tells you what it's about. Nothing huge. So what did you say it was about, Kathy? And again, I have no idea because this is
Well, any application is built on the code, and the code that builds it is the source of it. So
Okay.
it's source code, which is why it would be IT. But
Okay,
I'm
so-
thinking about one that I listen to, which is called the Hypochondriactor,
okay.
right? And that's Sean Hayes and Jason Bateman and the guy that Amy Poehler was married to.
Mhm.
What would you think it is, right? So I get what you're saying. Unless
Yeah,
they're
so-
promoting it, you don't know, right?
This is it. So you again, that's one thing you could go with. I will tell you, you'll get a lot of
Arnett.
clicks, but you may not get a lot of followers staying tuned until you understand what it's about. What's the next way you can name your podcast there, Sean?
What about a descriptive title?
Oh, like, okay, so there is the fitness podcast. Well, you know it's about fitness, right? It's pretty descriptive. It
My
tells you
mom
what it is.
has a
It's
clue.
not very catchy, but you know what you're getting. And then the final one, Sean?
In your own name.
So you could put your own name. You could call it the Sean Pickard podcast, but unless you have a following, you may not want to only use your name. Now, I will say that on my YouTube channel, I have Gaining Vision with Melanie Taddeo Malo. And the reason why I added my name was because Gaining Vision was gone. Now, I had enough people following me on other social media platforms so that, and with the book, they knew who I was. So not that I have thousands of people following, because I far do not, but at least some people would know who it is. So there's pros and cons to using your name, but please make sure that it's not just your name. Again, give some description. As much as I think you guys are all amazing and you probably have a lot to share, you're probably not going to get a lot of people connecting with you if they don't know who you are. Obviously, celebrities can use their names and get a huge following. So again, picking a name, you may want to have something like Raising Champions, Advanced Toastmasters, whatever. Or you may not, you may want to have RCAT, but again, that may not be so descriptive. People that aren't Toastmasters and not part of Raising Champions may not know what it's about. So naming your podcast is a very big endeavor. You have to make sure that it makes sense for what you're covering. So put some thought into it, don't jump to it. And again, we'll share this information. There's a little bit more detail in there. So Sean, we have a name, we answered the questions, we know the style that we're going to do. How do we create the content? What do we do next? Oh, maybe storyboard? Anybody know what? Sorry, go ahead.
That's your best option, Melanie, is the storyboard.
Yes, does anybody know what a storyboard is?
Mapping out different episodes.
Part of it, yes, absolutely. Anybody else?
It's mapping, basically it's taking all of your ideas and putting them into the sequence of what the story's going to be.
Okay, yes. So Sean, we're going to share a template which everybody will get of a storyboard. And this is the one we use for our class. It's very simplistic. Please, guys, obviously you can create any storyboard template you want. And Sean, I'm going to get you to read through it for me because I cannot see it, what you're sharing.
Well, this is the blank version that we have, ladies and gentlemen, the podcast storyboarding form. It's very simple. It starts out with title. What's your show about? Is it the title of the podcast?
Yes, so this is the title of the podcast. This is your podcast title. Then the description is the description of the podcast as the umbrella. What have you got? What is the main purpose of your podcast? And the description is important because when you upload it to any platform, it asks for a description. So you want to give as much information without going on for 10 years in your description. And then underneath that, Sean?
I was actually just going to go in a slightly different direction with that one, Melanie.
Okay.
Because what I like to do is use this form in two ways. Okay? So what I'll do is the title, and make that the title of the podcast. And then use my topics as a way of laying out my year of what I'm going to produce.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what we're going to do. You got it. So the description
And
is of the podcast overall.
And then I'll take another sheet and break it down episode by episode.
Okay. I see. So the topics you're saying are not your episodes. It's just the topics you want to cover in the year.
Correct.
Gotcha. Okay. So you guys can do what Sean does, or you can use the topics sheet as your episodes. And usually we have 10 episodes we map out. Don't panic. You don't have to do 10. You know what you have to do for your project. But why we ask you to map out so many ideas or topics is so you know where your podcast is going. So again, this for Raising Champions could be the PR team putting together, okay, we want a podcast on these topics. Who wants to cover them? And then the members can say, I want to do this one. And then they can come up with the episode storyboard.
Underneath that, we have our breakdown in segments.
So a segment, what is a segment, Sean?
A segment is a small, manageable piece of your show. So, for example, let's talk about an interview show. Let's say you interview 3 different people per episode. You're going to have each interview as a segment. You're not going to try and edit all 3 at the same time. You're going to edit them one at a time. So a segment is a small, manageable piece that you can work with. In a podcast, it's a roadmap. It allows you to direct where you want to take each piece that you're going with. It will help you get from one to the other. If this was radio, it would be your opportunity to go between breaks. Those are your different segments.
So always in segment 1, you're going to have an introduction. You're going to welcome your audience. You're going to, if it's your first episode, obviously, before that, you're going to have music. You're going to have some music at the beginning of your end of your podcast. And please make sure that your music is royalty free. Very, very important. You don't want to be charged and get your hands slapped or get a bill saying that you owe an artist some royalties. So there are different places to find it, and we can share that with you. It's Purple Planet, and what's the other one, Sean?
Purple Planet, and the other one that I use the most is Poddington Bear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Oh,
and again,
wow.
it's all instrumental. They've different moods, things like that. And again, it's only like 15 seconds of music, guys. It's not a lot. And it kind of just starts your podcast on the right foot. But your first segment, it has a little music, and then you're going to have your intro. Who are you? Welcome to your actual interview, to your podcast as a whole. Talk about what you're going to talk about. And then your next segment might be introducing your guests. Or it's going to be a little bit more information about what you're talking about. It depends on how you're mapping it out. The reason why we break it into segments, a couple of reasons. It helps you stay organized. It helps with the writing of a script. And then finally, it helps with the editing. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to record all your segments separately. It just means that when you're editing, okay, I made a blunder. I said the wrong name and segment number, whatever. When you go back to edit, you can kind of count back where you need to be. Some people will go segment by segment and record, especially when they're first starting. They may do the introduction and that's it. And then go back and do the rest. So when you have an ongoing podcast, sometimes you'll have an intro and an outro, the beginning and the end, that is the same every episode. So it might just be an introduction to the podcast itself, and the outro might be how people can reach you. And you may want to pre-record those and have them consistently the same, and you just edit them at the beginning and at the end. That's an option, but not everybody does that. So Sean, this blank page can be very daunting. How do we start this?
Oh, it's very daunting, but the easiest way that I've found is start with title. What's your show about? Break down your desires, your wants for the show. What direction do you want to go? Keep in mind what's coming up throughout the year. For example, I believe it's October is Cancer Awareness Month. right? So you don't really want to do something for Cancer Awareness Month in November. You've kind of missed the boat there. So keeping in mind, you're going to have these monthly topics that can come up that will give you a little bit to keep going with. You're going to have events that come up that you might want to bring attention to or talk about, things of that nature. So what is your show? Where do you want to go? And how do you want to get there? Just start jotting down ideas. It doesn't matter what the order is at first. You can sort out the order later.
And the
But
great thing,
every idea is important at first.
right? And again, the great thing, guys, this is just for you. Nobody else is going to see it. So just think of this as your roadmap. Where do you want to go? It's okay if you're going to take a detour, but just getting your ideas on paper, having you to picture how it's going to look. And you really segued nicely into something, Sean. The next thing, how often should we do a podcast? You said monthly. What about weekly? Should we not do one daily? Like, how often should we do it? Well, the reality is it depends on you and your audience. So, but be consistent. Let's face facts. I don't know about you, but I don't have time to do a daily podcast unless that's your full-time job is just a podcast. Then by all means do a daily one. Weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, or seasonal. Now, obviously, take some coordination. Garrett and I, we do one weekly, but we record bi-weekly. So every 2 weeks, we record 2 episodes. And then there is one every Saturday that is, so be consistent with the day and time that you're dropping, as they call it, your podcast into your platforms, but making sure that you're scheduled so that you're not struggling. Oh, I don't have one for this week because I didn't record enough. So consistency is going to help you keep your audience, because if you say every week on Saturday, people are going to tune, they're going to add you, they're going to follow you, and they're going to be excited to hear that next content. But if you miss a week or 2 or 3, because things happen, life happens. So set realistic timelines for yourself. Maybe monthly is the best, but please know if you're going to go monthly, you're going to lose a lot of your audience because it's not as current and not as up to date. And that's the other thing when you're recording, making sure, you'll notice on all my episodes, I'll say good day instead of good morning or good afternoon or good evening, because you don't know what time of day the person is listening to your podcast. So don't date it. Try not to make sure, like, no, Sean, you were saying about themes for different months, but unless you know that people are going to listen to it on that day or in that month, try to be as general as possible, keeping the content as relevant all the time, no matter what time. Frequency is up to you, really. What can you commit to? But make it known how often the podcast, new episodes will come available. Now, with the Raising Champions, our hope and goal will be that we will have one every 2 weeks. But that doesn't mean we can't do more, because once they're done, they're done. They're in the queue. They're ready to go. But we can't expect our members to jump through hoops to make sure we have enough content. What happens, Raj, then if we don't have an episode ready to go? We're struggling. We're trying to find, oh, come on, Raj, pull one out of your hat. No, it doesn't work that way. So being realistic and talking it through with your team, if you have a team of people, or knowing what your schedule and commitment is able to produce. Don't make it more work. The podcasting should be fun. It should be entertaining. Think of it as something of source of fun, sharing, connecting with people. So we now know how we are storyboarding and what we're talking about. We know what style we have. How do we connect with people to get interviews, Sean?
Oh, that can be the really, really fun part, Melanie, because now you've got to reach out and tap people on the shoulder and say, hey, I'm so-and-so, and this is what I do. Will you help?
Now, if you're tapping on people, other Toastmasters, you're probably going to get really quick answers because they want to be a part of something great. But if you're looking at interviewing those politicians I was talking at the very beginning, their schedules are a little busy and they may not be as available as you want them to be. So keep that in mind. Your list of people you want to connect with might be long. Really start to reach out with them early and start to plan your calendar. So you're prepared, they're prepared, and you know what you're doing. So if we have a plan, Sean, we know we've got it all ready. We have to create a script, don't we?
You don't have to, but it really helps. You know, you come across a lot more polished when you have your script with some ideas in front of you.
Now, as Toastmasters, we know we can do impromptu speaking. In fact, Garrett and I, we always have our topics researched and ready to go. If we have interviews, we have the questions prepared, but we just have a conversation. So it depends on the style. It depends. Some people like script. I can't see a script, so I won't use a script. I'll have talking points, but I will never have a script. Similar to writing a speech. You want to make sure that you know it, you've practiced it, you're familiar with the content. So sometimes perhaps script won't work for you, but always pre-plan what you're going to do and how it's going to flow. Even if it's just a storyboard and then some talking points, that's okay, as long as you know where you're taking the bus, as we call it. The host is driving the bus, the co-host is giving the color commentator. You'll notice like Karen and I swap back and forth who's hosting each episode, and the other person kind of just there for support and to add conversation. So again, it varies with style as well and who you are as a person, because some people love scripts because they can just read it word for word and they feel so much better. But other people just want to have a conversation and talk. So you have to decide what's going to work for you, but please be prepared. So now we have all of the steps ready, Sean. We're ready. We want to record. Oh, what equipment do we need?
Oh, that's the really fun part for me, Melanie.
I know, that's why I asked you.
The equipment we need. Let's start with the basics. A computer, right? Just about everything we do these days involves a computer at some point in time, ladies and gentlemen. Now, we can use the computer microphone to record, but I'll be honest with you, they're usually not that good. So having a better quality microphone will help you with your recording quality. Now, for the folks that were here earlier, when I turned on my camera briefly, you probably saw, actually, let me turn my camera on again, and you'll see that big scary microphone with the boom arm and everything else that I've got in front of me. And you don't need a big system like this. I'm just, one of those old school kind of guys. You can get microphones now that just, they're USB. You plug one end of the wire into the microphone, the other end into the computer, and you're recording. They're plug and play. They're really, really simple. And quite often, they're really not that expensive. Another thing that really helps is a microphone stand or a boom arm. Having the boom arm allows you to play with your keyboard, play with your mouse, hit sound effects. And I can still function. But at the same point in time, ladies and gentlemen, if I need to move around, I can still move the microphone with me and have what I need to be able to talk to you. One of the big things that we lose these days is what they call mic technique. Because everyone's so used to looking at these podcasts or these vlogs where you can see the person, but you don't see the microphone. Now, I've got my microphone set up so that I can talk to you folks in a nice, regular voice, and it's just a nice conversation. But I'm right on my mic. If I move the mic away...
Can't hear you, Sean.
Yeah, exactly. Right? So the microphone and knowing how to use it is a big thing. Don't let the microphone scare you, but getting as close to the microphone as you can, that allows you to get the full body of your voice.
Now,
It allows you to get all the depth and everything that's in there.
please know, guys, for a Toastmasters project, do not go and invest in a microphone, boom arm, and all that stuff if you're not going to be podcasting on a regular basis. Garrett and I do it on Zoom. We record on Zoom. That's how we do our podcast without microphones. So really, truly, you don't need a microphone, but the best quality sounding podcasts probably do use microphones. So again, you don't need to spend a lot of money to do a podcast with equipment, but some people like to make the investment. So it's up to you. But for a Toastmasters project, please don't spend the money. If you're going to do it for work, you're going to do it for fun, it's a hobby after the project is complete, then you may want to consider it. But please do your research, because if you're going to get a $60 microphone on Amazon, you're going to get what you pay for. Please know that.
Yes, the $60 microphone on Amazon is. Please don't do it. Just don't, please.
It's your money.
Canadian dollars?
Pardon? Sorry?
Yes.
$60 Canadian dollars?
Yes, Canadian dollars. Sorry. Yes, Canadian dollars. But again, not a good quality. But you don't need a Blue Yeti. And that's top
No.
line. So again, figuring out what your intention is with podcasting. Some people do it on their phone with Anchor. You can record directly to Anchor. And that's okay too. That's all right. Because here's the thing. A lot of people are give and go. You'll see a lot of podcasters out there that are on the go, stopping people on the street and interviewing them. They've just got their phone. Depending on your phone, the quality of the microphone, that's okay as well. So equipment doesn't have to be outrageously expensive. It doesn't have to be too much. It doesn't have to be scary. I personally like using a lapel mic, a Bluetooth mic, but if you move around and you make extra noise, you have to edit that sound out. So be mindful of your selection of equipment, but you don't need a lot of it. Really, truly, you can do it with your computer mic. We're not here to get you to invest in all this equipment. That's not it. But the one thing I will say, when you are recording, please make sure that you're in a quiet environment. Don't have your window open with the traffic going by. Don't have the kids running in the background or the dogs barking in your background. And of course, because you're at home, if the phone rings, make sure you pause so you know you have to edit it out, because we can't control what happens in the background environment. But Sean, you have some really cool setup where you are. It's almost like a studio. What do you have on your walls?
Oh, I've got a little bit of fabric running down the walls just to soften the room up so I get less bounce in the room. I've seen I'm sure a lot of folks at college used egg cartons, right? Or they've seen folks use egg cartons. Please don't do that. It's a fire hazard, by the way.
Please do not do that. And again, guys, don't go out and buy an insulated like foam or anything like that. It's not necessary. Podcasting is just another way to communicate and to connect with people. You'll hear some podcasts that are really bad quality of recording, and that's okay because the content is exceptional. So we will definitely be sharing with you all of the details of what we've covered today, how to get started, and then a video on how, once you've recorded, to edit it, as well as how to upload it to those different platforms. But Sean, before I get into the Raising Champions podcast exactly, I just wanted to talk a little bit about where we should be putting our podcasts. Can we talk about RSS feeds, please?
Absolutely. We can talk about RSS feeds. And what would you like to know about RSS feeds? I mean, what does RSS stand for? First of all, really simple syndication, ladies and gentlemen. Really simple syndication.
Now you can have your RSS feed on your website, on your social media, or you can even just, basically it's a way to get the information out to different platforms. Anchor, as we mentioned, Anchor FM is one that does it for you. You just upload your podcast there, whether you're created there or you're doing it separately and uploading it, and it will distribute it to the different platforms. Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever ones you select. Please know though, now, if you're using Anchor, it's a whole process. Before you just check box and it went everywhere. Now you have to apply to the different platforms. You have to enter information, and it's a business now. It doesn't cost anything, but it's a business. So some people will go to the same old school RSS feed that is just a link on your website. Sean, do you want to talk a bit more about that?
The old school way is actually, for me, the far easiest way, because you can find the content you're looking for just by going to the website instead of going to another place and then having to sort through different podcasts. And it's really simple when you just post your podcast to your website with the link right there so that people can just download it and go right from the website. It's really, really simple. But that's me, and I'm the guy that likes to go to the source. Most other people, they just like to go to iTunes or whatever the case may be and say, what have you got? And they'll start sorting through those things.
So, Sean, when we get And again, Liz will be covering this for us of how to upload it, how to get it out there, and how to promote it. It's out there in the world. You want to cross promote, you want to talk to people, you want to have conversations, you want to share it on social media. You want to definitely be engaging with people to like, follow, share, subscribe, whatever terms you want to use, all of those things, because the more people know about it, the higher SEO will go, similar to the blog, and you want to get as much traction as possible. Please know that whatever you're putting out there in the internet is there forever. So whatever you're talking about, make sure you're comfortable that it's out there, because it is a reflection on you for years and years and years to come. So for the Raising Champions Advanced Toastmasters podcast, or for any Toastmasters club that wants to have it, you as a club need to come up with what your podcast will be called, how often, the frequency of it, who are you going to tap on to do the projects, and who's going to be responsible for uploading it and getting it out there and promoting it. But it needs the help of all the members that are involved. Not only are you benefiting from the Pathways project, but you're also going to have a voice. You're going to be representing your club. So make sure that you're using that amazing Toastmaster skills that you have in creating and writing a podcast similar to a speech, as well as you're using your vocal variety, engaging your audience, asking questions, and just really creating amazing content. My call to action to every one of you is to go through the information, start to think about what type of podcast you would create, and then finally start to craft something. Reach out to me if you have any further questions about any of the resources that we'll share. And again, I will be sending out the video follow-up once it's ready with the editing and uploading to the different platforms. But now I want to open it up for questions.
Raj has a hand up.
Go ahead.
Okay, so Melanie, thank you for this information. Firstly, I have one question and one information to share. So the question is, when we come up with the content, as you said, we have to be very mindful. So is there like, before we post any episodes, do we have to get it checked from any of the body which verifies if we are using any of the non-discriminatory, all those words? Because...
No, and this is the one thing about podcasting, it's a free-for-all because it is online. Right now, there is no laws about that, but please be mindful, obviously, to be as inclusive as you can. Represent yourself, and if you are doing it for a Toastmasters Club, your club, or for your business. So there's nothing that says you can only say this or you shouldn't say this, none of that, but just common sense. Now, going further along in Canada, we have introduced the potential of Bill C-100, right, Sean?
C-10.
C-10, thank you. And this is where they will monitor your content, but it hasn't been passed yet. So again, intellectual property is your content, but it does have to represent who you want to be seen as a podcaster, as an individual, as a business owner, whatever it is you're doing it for, or as a Toastmaster. If by chance you are doing it for Toastmasters, obviously we want to make sure that it's under Toastmasters guidelines. You're not going to be necessarily talking about things that we don't talk about in our speeches. Try to keep them as clean as possible. There's no need to swear or use profanity if you can avoid it. I saw a post in one of the districts and it said somebody wanted to use swearing in their speeches. If it's absolutely necessary, we're not trying to squash people's ideas and creativity or freedom of speech. But again, if it's under Toastmasters umbrella, we want to be respectful of their brand. So that's only advice I would give, Raj, but it's a great question. Thank you.
And maybe just the last thing which I'd like to share to everyone. So basically the podcast, the POD stands for Portable on Demand. And that's where from the Apple company has introduced the iPods. So the idea podcast came from there. Just wanted to share this.
Yeah, because they used to be actually audio blogs. That's what they used to be called. Then they actually talked about guerrilla media. There was a whole bunch of different titles before they actually decided on podcasting. So that's great. Thank you, Raj.
I have a quick question on intellectual property.
Yes, sir.
If you could clarify this, someone had told me that if you are uploading to Spotify, they automatically own the intellectual property.
don't think that's accurate. I will say this, what I always tell my students is before you actually release your podcast, create a whole package, including the storyboard, your concept, the title, everything, and mail it to your self-registered mail and don't open it. That is copyright. You then have the rights to it. You may be giving them freedom to share it and because you're putting it on a different public platform, but they don't own it, no. Any other questions?
I had a question, actually.
Yes, Jordan, go ahead.
How do you decide what your target audience will be?
Very good
It's a
question.
generic topic.
Very good question. So if you're doing a podcast for Toastmasters, we can assume that it's people interested in public speaking. And you may want to talk about a topic that's related to them. If you're doing a podcast for a business, let's just say you have a home decorating business and you're trying to generate some business through a podcast, your topics will probably be related to your business. Again, similar to Kathy knew right away what IT was. Maybe she wants to talk about IT, I don't know. Or perhaps you want to have a conversation. So you want to keep it really relevant to what purpose of the intention behind it. That doesn't mean, so like with my podcast, Garrett and I, we love talking about different things, especially uncomfortable conversations. But our topic changes. We don't know who our audience is. When we started, we had no idea who's going to listen. So we created content for ourselves. That's okay at the beginning, but really, truly, once you get to know your audience, you want to pay attention. You want to reach out to them on social media, find out what they want to hear about, get suggestions from them, find out what they're listening. You'll notice also as you start to see who's listening to what, who's commenting on what, you'll start to see this type of content they like. So really it's a slow process, but something you can start with generalizing, talking about things that you think your audience wants to know. But if they don't like it, they'll tell you, trust me, they won't listen and you'll know, and you'll have to pivot and switch. That's a great question, Jordan. Thank you. Any other questions?
No other questions at this time.
So how many of you already know what you're going to podcast about? Oh, Teresa, what are you going to podcast about?
Well, Ian and I are going to podcast about Top Drawer.
Awesome. See, there you go. And that's great. Fantastic. And again, so would you be doing a co-host style or would you do a hybrid so you can have a bunch of different styles?
Hybrid, I think. Yes.
It's hybrid is the safest one for Toastmasters because especially if members are doing their projects, you're not limiting them to have to do it in this style. And that will help them be creative and give them a full experience. Anybody else want to share what they're going to podcast about? Paige, do you have a podcast? What is your podcast about?
It's about the paranormal.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yes, it's a very cool podcast. You may not know now, but take some time to think about it. And for Raising Champions, we will be definitely giving you more details once we have our next meeting of what comes next, the next steps for that. But for anybody, if you have more information and more questions after you read the resources and watch the video by Liz, please reach out. Happy to give you additional information.